Good evening. This is the Capital Facilities Committee meeting of the Concord School District on Monday, January 8th. To start off, I'll call the roll. Ms. Higgins?
Here.
Mr. Richards?
Here.
Ms. Walsh?
Here.
And I'm here. Everybody is present. We have a number of other folks with us this evening, but we will go ahead and start off. Superintendent, did you have anything?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I'll just let Matt jump right in and start on the agenda.
Mr. Cashman, I'm going to turn it over to you, the agenda construction manager RFP.
Thank you, Bob. Mr. Richard is here. I almost said Mr. Richard. And we have Bobby Williams as well from HMFH Architects. I wanted to tonight talk a little bit about the RFP that we're getting ready to do for construction management, and then roll into a discussion that we'd like to bring forward to you about building committees and working groups. So the RFP that we're working on, and we're hoping to release that this month, it encompasses essentially 4 different sections to the document. You have an intro where you give a good history. I think on ours we want to point to the middle school website that we have that has lots and lots of detail to it. Kind of give anyone who's bidding on the project, give them a good running start of the history, what we've been through, all the way from 2017 up until present. The next part of that is typically a selection process category where we talk about the criteria that we're looking for in a firm. So we want to look at all projects that they've done, not just schools, but just other projects. Did they come in where they originally estimated? What were their change orders? We always check references, and as you know, firms will put their best foot forward and put the references that they know they're going to speak well of that particular firm. But some of the things that I like to do is talk to other references that aren't on the list, just to get a good, opinion on folks out there. And then the company project history. Again, a list of the different projects that they've had. Did you have a question, Pam?
Listening.
Oh, okay. It's just a good comparative way to solicit that information for ultimately the group that's going to be interviewing and deciding on the firm. The next section of an RFP, the one that I like to put a lot of emphasis on, is the purpose and the desired outcome. That's where you very early on lay out your expectations for the work that you're going to be doing with a particular construction firm. We have experience. We've done this before with our other projects well past the elementary schools that we did. I think it's a great document. It's a kind of a cookbook. You can put whatever expectations you want in there, and you can always refer back to it. So that, too, is something that we'd include in the RFP. And then lastly, and these are ones you want to pay a lot of attention to detail on, are the instructions. So, typically we'll ask for an electronic copy, a couple of hard copies for the team that's going to be evaluating. We talk a little bit about the grading criteria and how the group will grade on certain areas of the whole RFP and the sections in it. And then we'll also put a pretty simple but a straightforward schedule. So we'll release the RFP, we'll have a on-site meeting for those interested parties. A lot of times we make it mandatory for the firms to come. Everyone hears the same questions. We have an exchange of Q&A back and forth. We would have our architects and our sub-consultants there as well, just so that everybody's abreast of all the questions that could be asked about the particular project. And then we walk through the phases of receiving the RFP, interview process, because it's very, very helpful if you're going to be engaging in 2 years worth of work with a firm. You really want to know it's the same as you would an interview for a job. You want to get to know who the folks that you're going to be working with early on.
Okay, just a couple of questions come to mind on a couple of these points. Are you going to, when you look at the criteria, are you planning to limit this to New Hampshire
We can.
companies or not? Or?
We certainly can put that criteria in there. I would like to put it as New Hampshire firms because I think you're going to feed back to the local economy. If you think about not just a contractor, but all the sub-consultants to them, the plumbers, the electricians, the trades folks.
You think there's enough good qualified
I definitely
management
do.
companies out there that can do that?
I absolutely do.
Okay.
And there's great subcontractors. We use a lot of them. Other school districts use quite a few of them. So there's a lot of work out there, and I think it's pretty competitive.
Second question, the evaluation team, or maybe it's premature, but do you have thoughts on, the cross-section of people you're looking to have on the evaluation team?
You know, I reflect back when we did the architects. So we had a couple of members. We had a traffic engineer on the team, Nicole Fox, with us. We had a couple of board members on there. I think we'd want to mirror something similar to that, get a cross-section of people.
Yeah, I'd encourage you to get some public input,
Okay, we can reach out.
And Nicole's a good example. I mean, people who have experience but are not necessarily directly tied to the school district.
I agree. I think.
May I ask a question? Bob, when you said public input, and what does that mean?
Well, no, I meant
Just a variety of people on the committee.
variety of people on the
Absolutely.
evaluation team.
Yep, that's what I
Let's
wanted
not
to
keep it too tight in-house.
Right.
is all.
Agreed.
I'm not suggesting public hearings or any of that kind of thing.
I think
at
at one of
this
our
stage.
meetings, I think Pam mentioned a couple of people that might be interested in serving locally that would help us with that process.
Okay,
I agree.
okay. Yes, Pam?
When do you expect the bids to be back? Or what is your due date going to be for them, the timeline of this
So
process?
I do have a timeline a little bit later, but I can talk to it right now. I'd like to get the RFP out this month, walk through that process of bringing people in, questions and answers. Like to be able to get the RFP and determine the construction management firm by May.
May.
How are they typically paid? Is it a flat fee? Is it a percentage of costs, percentage of savings?
It's typically, that's a pretty involved question. I know it more as fees, but I'm sure when you negotiate with a firm, you could, Jack, you'd be involved as well. It would, it's usually fee-based.
Well, since our goal is to bring the project cost
Absolutely.
down, I think fee-based is probably better than percentage, but I just wanted to make sure.
Right.
Fees plus incentives is another method
Yeah.
that I have
Mhm.
seen used in this situation.
Yeah.
And what is our experience as a district, or yours, Matt, with working with a construction? Because we didn't use a construction management firm for the middle schools, the elementary schools, right?
We didn't, but your team setup would be by and large the same. You'd have a project manager from the construction firm. You'd have a crew of people that do cost estimating, schedulers. You'd have site supers on the job. We can require, and we had in the past, even on more recent projects, I like to have the PMs on site with me so that we can. That face time you need when you're running a project. It's critical. So that's what I would recommend we do.
Yeah, Jim?
Duration of having this project manager, you want to get back by May, you want to get it in by when, and how long will they be through the entire project till
So
final completion, or will they
I
be
have-
through construction?
If you will bear with me, the very last slide, I have a good schedule and we can review that.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Matt.
No, you're fine.
I didn't read ahead. I should.
Any other
Other
questions
questions?
about our?
Okay. Sounds good, thank you.
Sure. The next part, we wanted to put some time and start the discussion of, this is just a graphic of what we were talking about. We would have a building committee. The only names we put on there so far are the people from administration that we would have as facilitators. But, typical, what we would look at is maybe 2 school board members, and then again, members of the public and different staff, maybe in the schools, as the overall building committee. But in that same vein, we would also have working groups. So we tried to break out, Kathleen and I and Jack did some work, and we looked at, could we do a communication work group, a site work group? So we know we're going to be building the school, so we might want to have a group working on looking at all the aspects of the site. Sustainability, that's something we've talked about throughout the life of the project. Traffic and transportation. Programs, and where you get to programs, it does get a lot more involved. So we wanted to break into even smaller subgroups. You have ELL, special ed, curriculum, after-school programs, and athletics. And I think another group that we talked about as a solid working group would be an RMS transition group, a group that could really thoughtfully look at when we build the building and how does that whole transition. Are there time capsules? Jay, you might have some ideas of some things when you transitioned right across the street when you did your.
One question I have on that would, and maybe this would be where it is, but I think we need to have a group that looks at possible uses of the old RMS building. Maybe that's part of the transition group, I don't know, but, there's the knockdown option and other possibilities have been put out there, so.
I agree with you, and I guess the question is, there was Ms. Meeker's suggestion about saying goodbye, and that is definitely...
That's a different kind of...
And that seems different than figuring out the future of the site. So, whether there are 2 working groups under transition, one
Right.
is, saying goodbye. There's probably also going to be at some point a need for a naming working group, and then a real estate working group. And I don't know that they all have to
Yeah.
meet concurrently, but
But I see what you're saying. You could put those job tasks underneath,
yeah,
one of those, and
but I think they are separate.
But, yeah, looking at the use of the property is very different than planning for a, meaningful transition for the
And I
kiddos.
assume that there's, as you showed us, you've already started going through boxes of documents, right? So, what needs to be saved for legal reasons, what needs to be saved for historical reasons.
Historical is a big piece of it too. It's important to work with local historical societies for,
Yeah.
people will want to make sure we're preserving some things. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Yeah. So it's important to make sure you're working with like a local historical society, because there's definitely residents who will want to make sure there's things preserved from, the current site location, no matter what you determine to do with the building. I do have experience with some of that, and I know that's really invaluable. So I assume, and I'm embarrassed to say, we must have like a Concord historical group.
Yeah.
So those people that I definitely would want to work closely with and give them an opportunity to come in and visit and see what they're interested in.
You should include the librarian. There's a Concord room at the Concord Public Library, so they might be interested
Oh, okay.
in some things.
Yep. So those are things I'll need help with in terms of once we get
Yep.
there, who are the people who are really interested in those things, and I would meet with them and collaborate with them and make sure we're supporting what their goals are to preserve items.
You have athletics under programs, and I think it's definitely part of programs, but I also wonder if we need if site is just the building, or if that is going to be where athletic fields we include, how we connect to the trails, how do we use the trails, that outdoor, what kind of playgrounds do we have, that type of thing.
Okay. We were talking too at our upcoming retreat. we were going to use a lot of that time
Yep.
too to kind of bring some shape to this a little bit. But I think you're right. I think that that can definitely be a all-encompassing
Yeah.
task to try to get all those areas.
And I don't know what it falls under, and I know it's central to the design, but I think, some sort of accessibility working group that's not just thinking about like meeting the standards of the ADA, but how do we have an accessible play area, or low visibility, or just that we're planning for the future of accessibility needs as well.
That's a good point.
Yes, Barb?
Two things come to mind right now for me in terms of the transition. So land use for the naming of a new school if we change the name, all of those things, but also somebody that's really focusing on the students' transition themselves, things that are specific to them, either little ceremonies or activities, or I just think the students should be a big piece of that. And in terms of like the historical piece, we have a town full of people that have a lot of connections, school district-wise, retired teachers, retired administrators. Those would be good people to have on that facility. And then athletics is athletics, and trails and playgrounds are more programmatic. So I think athletics likely would fall under two places. I mean, field space, when I think of athletics, I think of after-school athletic programs. And Parks and Rec do some at that age. A lot of those sixth graders do Parks and Rec sports. So I think it is a program, but I also think it would have to perhaps marry under two, because it's also a site issue.
Okay.
Just following up on what you said there, Barb, I think that's interesting, because when I think of the trails, I also think about community access, which is
Right.
having the students be able to use the trails is great, but we also need to ensure that there's still community access to not just our property, but the property that's in back of our property.
Well, and we have a city that marries city facilities and school facilities together all the time.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of communities that's completely separate, and ours isn't. So I think in all of our planning around that site, that's a very good point. Not only do we have to think what works best for the kids, but what works best for the community members that would be likely to use those pieces of property. I know having spent years and years and years at Memorial Field, it's a constant dance with community members wanting to use the facilities at the same time the school is there, who pays for wear and tear. All of those things have been debated over the years, and so I think we need to.
It may even come to things like having some parking spaces.
Right, well, yeah, that came to
for the
mind.
public,
Right,
that
right.
can be used. So, yeah.
Bob, I was just gonna follow up on accessibility. We wanna make sure that we have people who have lived through accessibility in the schools to know, have input on things such as, how do you move from one part of school to the other? Elevators, accessibility to the common areas, all of those things are things that, someone like me, for instance, would not have the best insight into, so make sure that those
Can be
folks
the
are-
height of the blackboards, or the
Exactly, all of those
not that we
things.
use blackboards anymore, but
But the monitors and
Yep.
the transitions from inside to outside, and all of those things are key. I think we want to get a lot of input on.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
That's great input.
Can I just make a comment? Something for you to consider is that as you look at all of the areas, the priority areas under the building committee and the subgroups, remember we need to have a facilitator, and that's why Matt identified him. So I want to be be cognizant of stretching the staff, because I have to have a facilitator to take notes, to make sure meetings are set up, advertised, posted, so that the general public can avail themselves of these meetings. So just keep that in mind
Yeah.
as we do that. That's why I like the idea of putting categories under those major 5 areas. Because if I try to do, like, let's take programs, if I had a separate group for each one of those,
That's a boatload of
I
people.
will
Yeah.
never be able to
Yeah.
facilitate it. So I'm thinking the people that serve on program, which will be a pretty large group, right? But they would tackle each one of those topics it's important, those are important topics. We may add others too. I'm not saying those are the only ones, but
Then my
just be
suggestion
cognizant
would
of
be
that.
To make sure you have an ELL teacher or administrator on that board. You have a
Absolutely.
special ed teacher on that board.
Absolutely.
You have a curriculum facilitator on that board. You have a 21C person on that board. You have somebody involved in athletics on some level.
Coaches
on
and
that.
yeah,
Right.
AD. But I also just be aware that that would fall into programs, and so I would be asking John and Kim and Jay to facilitate those.
Yeah, that
And
makes sense.
I'm going to just move about, so, because I want to be a part of many of these.
No, that's a
So,
good point.
just-
We can't overstretch.
No, but we have to make sure we have
We
the
cover
right
everything.
people
I agree.
to cover.
But no, I think Barb's point is well
Yeah,
taken.
yeah.
I have to make sure that everybody, for instance, sustainability, we want to make sure we have the city and the folks that have been doing that work and others
Right.
that understand that topic. So, yes, I agree.
Right.
Transportation and traffic, there's been a lot of discussion about CAT and the ability for them to use the buses. I noticed that there's going to be a new route from Concord to Laconia that CAT's going to be running. So what else can they do in the city to help us with transportation?
And on
That's
that
one of the
point, I'm
things
not
Terry
going to,
talked, not Terry Wolf, but Terry Crotty talked to me about, so.
yeah, I won't get into the details too much, but I notice you've got Jay listed as the facilitator for that, and I suspect Jay's going to be pretty busy on lots of other stuff, so I'm just,
We may rethink that.
you may rethink that one, I would think. And we need to still come up with somebody for the whole transition issues, so, yeah.
Yep, we're
But
not.
but your
quite
point's
there
well
yet.
taken about not making this more complicated than it needs to be and not overwhelming people who have jobs that they're already doing, so. Yeah.
And
What
these
is-
don't occur during the day, they have to occur in the late afternoon, early evening, because obviously the folks out in the community aren't accessible during the day, so I have to think about that.
Wouldn't it make sense to have a transportation person on the traffic and
Yeah,
transportation?
like
Yeah.
Terry.
Like Terry.
Yeah, like
And
Terry.
then Jay on transition,
Yep.
right? I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
Yeah, I think you'll see a lot of folks helping out in programs. I mean, certainly that's, let's face it, that is the bread and butter of the work that we do every day, right? That program. So we'll have a pretty wide variety of folks on that and folks that can help with that.
Okay. Matt?
Okay.
Go ahead.
The next slide is really, it's just more bullet points from the previous slide. But, as we're talking about this really could be a good platform for us to talk about at the retreat. I think we had talked about as a topic.
On the agenda.
We'll have the whole board, and so. All right. Just kind of wanted to go over briefly the 5 phases of design. So we're just stepping into schematic design. I think we talked a little bit about it earlier, that we would get into the early summertime with schematic design. The following phase would be design development, and then we would go into construction documents, bidding and negotiation once we have solid construction stamp documents. And then once the project starts, for the life of the project, we have construction administration. So we felt it would be helpful just to kind of highlight those phases of the project and the design of it.
So the one question I have, and maybe Jack, you should weigh in here too, is I don't want to get too far down the road with design until we know cost. On the other hand, I know you don't know cost until you know design. How do we balance those two issues? Because, we've heard loud and clear from the community that, $176 million is probably not the right number.
I
So,
think there's a couple things. I think one is schematic design is where that's going to be at. That's where you're going to be able to do some of that engineering piece. And that's going to happen for the next 6 months. But at the end of that 6 months, you're gonna have a number that's tighter than the number you have now. Because that number was based on a lot of assumptions on a piece of land you didn't own yet.
Right.
You didn't buy yet, didn't prep yet, soil sand, number of different things. So once we get through schematic design, we're gonna have a better idea of where we're at.
Okay. And during that
Because a lot of
process,
that
and
is
that- during that process, for example, on sustainability, we'll decide what we can do, what we can't do based on cost.
You know, do you buy solar panels? Do you do a PPA, a power purchase agreement? You know, do you do the geothermal?
Geothermal, whatever it is.
You know, you get into the building. I mean, this has a 900 student auditorium. The state building aid only covers half that. Do you pick up the rest of that? Those kind of things are what we see you doing in that schematic design. Obviously, it can go on a little more further in the process, but I think your costs will begin to mount as you want to make those kind of changes.
Right,
So,
okay.
How much is this phase before we know whether we're going to have building aid or whether the legislature is going
how
to?
much do I estimate that will be?
That this phase will
About
cost?
1.8 million,
1.8 million.
1.8, 1.9, somewhere around there.
So to be prudent, this design has to be applicable in 2 years or
4 years.
4 years or 6 years, if that's the, whatever the, you know, I can't predict the building aid type of thing, but we want to make sure this design is a little bit timeless or not dependent on the actual time.
You mean
So I
that
mean,
it's
when
eligible
we-
for building aid?
Well, if we're gonna invest 1.8 million in a schematic design,
Yeah.
if we don't get building aid and say, you know what,
Oh,
we can't afford
okay.
this, we need to feel confident or comfortable that this design will be applicable 2 years past that, or 4 years past that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want us to be, you know, aware, because, you know, we're gonna hit a hard point of making a decision if building aid doesn't come through, and
Sure.
and actually at the results of what this schematic design number comes out to, regardless of building aid.
Right.
So we just want to be able to make sure that whatever we do is applicable in the future, in so much as we can make it. I know we can't predict codes and things like that.
Sure.
Yeah, and costs will go up or down depending
Yeah,
on the economy, but yeah. Other questions, thoughts?
You know, I just would add, we're going to be looking at the cost well past schematic design too. When we start shaping that design and it starts to get more fine-tuned, we're going to be doing cost estimates. A term often used is value engineering. No, I would suspect we would go through phases of that too as we work on our final number. And that would be occurring throughout the process.
Can you explain what value engineering is?
So, I'll give you an example, like something that some schools take out of the project right away is mechanical, they call them mechanical penthouses. It's keeping your mechanical HVAC rooftop units within the shell of the building with a roof on it in a heated room. I've seen in Laconia, they had the penthouses built in early on in the project for the middle school about 12 years ago, and they wound up taking that out because the committee at the time just felt that that was a lot of money to put around there. I tend to feel that it's one of the most important or one of the most expensive parts of a building system is your HVAC, so it's like keeping a car in a garage and protecting it from the sun and the weather, and you can maintain it. But you would get cost breakouts on that and then be able to evaluate, is this something we want to push forward with, or do we want to take it out?
And would those cost estimates include operational costs over the life of the system or building?
It would, because
Comparisons?
if you're in, I want to say it extends the life of the equipment close to 15 years more than if it's just sitting on the roof.
And I think some examples we talked about was big value engineering, because it could also be, it's cuts and also adds. It's the simple way of putting it.
Yep.
when we did the last project of the 3 schools, part of some of the value engineering was when after the bidding came in and realized there was some more money, instead of doing the VCT tile, we put the rubberized flooring because that was better on people's back. It was easier to clean. It lasted longer, so we valued that back in. I think the other one was the roof. We went,
Right.
instead of an EPDM roof, we went to the PVC roof, so that's why they're white instead of black, because there was enough in there to be, okay, let's add that back in. So that's where you have value engineering, is both adding and subtracting. But we would try to create designs that you have that capability, so when the bids do come in, if you're running better than you want, and you want to say, that thing that we talk about, can we add that? It wouldn't be, for example, the student theater, the 900 student theater, you're not adding that in and bidding and negotiation.
Right.
You're not, you're too far gone at that point.
It's materials and things like
Yeah.
that.
I say, but at that point, do you go with leather seats? Do you go with cloth seats? Do you go with cheap cloth seats?
Vinyl.
Yeah, exactly.
Vinyl?
Yeah.
That would be the value.
Do you get people to donate
Yeah,
seats
the
and
lighting,
plaques in the
the
back?
sound
Donate
systems.
seats. Well,
Sure.
do you go with tile in your bathrooms, or you just do drywall?
Right, right.
That's where
There
value
you go.
engineering gets
Right. Yep.
into play, and you have to weigh the long-term cost versus the.
And you'll have a cost, they'll say, this is what they estimated to be, you add it, and we recalculates. Yeah, I remember doing that before.
And to your point, Pam, too, they'll give you lifespan costs. So the rubber tile was a Nora floor that we used, and it had like a 30-year lifespan to it. And it was easier, more sustainable to clean because you didn't use harsh chemicals, stripping and waxing. You used essentially a soap and water mix. So we do look at things like that.
Which has a value as,
It does.
sustainability-wise for the environment as well, if you want to put a value on that.
And that'll count towards your points for any type of incentives, energy incentives.
So, I think we might want to call them rooms on the roof for the HVAC as opposed to penthouse, make it an
remember.
easier sell for the community.
Same thing when you said that. I was like, ew.
Seems like that term's still that
Nobody
way
likes
15
that.
years later.
I didn't even like saying it.
Rooftop.
Let's just
Roof house.
eliminate the use of the word
But-
penthouse
All right.
But
and
to Matt-
Cadillac.
But to Matt's point, literally, when we were there and we went and visited, when they value engineered, they left half the building in the penthouse or
Mechanical room.
Mechanical.
glorified shed. And then on the left, they took it out, and I asked the engineers, I said, what's the life? They said half. And you could literally, only 2 years in, the rust coming down the doors of the equipment. Whenever somebody comes and services, they're out in the weather. Here, they just open the door, they walk right in, changing filters, all right there.
I look at those big ticket items like shoes. My grandfather was really poor, my great-grandfather. He bought us all expensive shoes every year because you can't, good health is your shoes, right?
Yeah.
You can buy a cheap coat, you can wear a crappy hat, but poor shoes make you sick in other ways. And I just feel like this is like the shoes of the building.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like
Yeah, it's a
money
good
either,
analogy.
but
Sure.
we can buy the cheap seats, but we can't buy the cheap HVAC.
Yeah.
Bob, I just wanted to mention that I asked Terry to sit in on these meetings, since it's critical that she begin to get messages out
Yeah.
into the community about the work that's being done in the best way. And Terry said to me today, the best way for her to do that is to be in attendance at these committee meetings of the board. And so, and of course, I welcome her with
Yeah.
open arms, because I think it would
I
be
very much
helpful.
appreciate that, Terry, and actually, Matt and I talked earlier today just about the agenda, and communications in this whole process is absolutely key, and, we've been hammered to some degree about not being as communicative as we should have been up to this point, and I think having you now dedicated to that role is really, really important going forward. So thank you for being here. Other
Any other?
thoughts, questions?
All right. So this is a little bit tough to read because it's small, but we asked the architects, and of course Bobby's here with us tonight, to take a snapshot of the next 5-6 months, kind of show where we have been. So we had the site selection, and then show the upcoming work to be done. And so it was just it's a good way to lay out graphically what takes place in schematic design. The working groups, as you can see up there, we'll have the school board meetings. The building committee would report out to the school board when they, at the appropriate times. We would have additional meetings throughout this process with school staff to confirm space needs. Would also be working with, there's a lot of work with local government, the state fire marshal. There'd be meetings like that going on. The city, we have the development review committee with the city, you'll see that. Sustainability meetings, we talked about looking at having a charrette, workshops, and then I think Jack alluded to it earlier, would be working with Unitil and New Hampshire Saves on rebates and that sort of thing as it goes into design. And then you see some key milestones. But I just, go ahead, Bob.
One thing I note up there is, and we talked about it briefly earlier today, I just wanted to bring it up and get some input, probably from Terry and from the rest of you guys, is community meetings. The first one is scheduled for, what, January 16th? I'm just, here's my initial thoughts on it. I think it's critical that we get community input. I'm not sure what we have to tell them on January 16th. I think it's early in the process, and I'd just like to get some feedback from you guys. I mean, is there something new that we're going to have by a week from now that warrants having a community meeting?
How are the community meetings different than them just listening to us here?
Good question, but I mean, they would be different, I presume, and Terry, jump in, that we would advertise and ask people to come and give us their thoughts and, you know, that sort of thing. But to me, it's just too soon in the process. But so I open it. Yeah, Terry, please.
Thank you. Well, we've had several discussions on what we think a community meeting could be like. And I'm new here, but based on, I feel like, based on some of the public comments I've heard so far, that maybe some people haven't been engaged in the process earlier. So they're not really familiar with all the work that has been done since 2017. So a community meeting could be an opportunity for people to kind of get up to speed, to rehear what work has been done, but also as the architect starts to really dig down into this design and finalize, they need to get to the point where they're working on, is a final draft a good phrase? Like, they need to have it kind of solidified to some extent before they keep moving forward. That's why we put it soon, and then we can keep going. Or we can have them keep going, but I was thinking we don't want the community to feel like they didn't have the opportunity to have input.
Well, but I agree, but I feel like it needs to be around topics, because if you just say we're going to have a meeting and we're going to rehash everything we did,
So the two
then it
topics.
won't.
That won't be a good meeting.
Well, it won't be a good meeting, and people won't. If it's a review of the history, people. I mean, what motivates people to come is a specific. So if it's a community meeting about the size of the auditorium.
I don't think we'd be
I don't-
going that granular. So what we've discussed is programming. So the programming topics, the overall of, so visioning was done in the past. So this is kind of where we are today. You know, this was the process. Any comments before we move forward? And then the other one was the sustainability piece. We know a lot of people have interest in the sustainability. Kind of, I think that's the one that's very large and from a financial perspective could go a variety of ways. So to get to a more solid number, a more solid refined number, is this an opportunity to just have some conversations with people, or we could put it off? We were just want to make sure people feel like they have the opportunity to be heard.
No, I appreciate that. My gut is that we put it off until we have a little more momentum in
Well, and should we have the working groups at least?
Yeah.
So that the working groups could maybe kick off their work with
yeah, and frankly, I mean,
that,
the
you know,
public-
with a public meeting.
public members in those working groups would be the appropriate people, among others, to try to get to come to a community meeting, you know.
So when the sustainability group is formed, you know, if they wanted to start off, you know, I think it'd be great if they started off with a public, well, I mean, all their meetings will be public, but like
Right.
a public discussion, an opportunity for the public. Same with like the overall program group.
Barb, Jim, any thoughts?
I think we don't have anything to say right now. It's gonna make anyone feel connected or positive, I think. It
Yeah.
has to get going.
Yeah. That's kind of my gut.
I agree.
That works.
And next week, wouldn't give people enough time, so that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be really quick.
They would
Absolutely.
might not be happy with us that we're not giving them enough time.
I don't disagree with
Yeah.
that, but I just want you to know that we were trying to make sure that the architects had the information, and we,
Yeah.
you know, we didn't, and we, as Terry said, we gave everyone a chance
Yeah.
to review what's been done and to add anything that they think we missed, whether it's an outdoor education room or whether it's the trails or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And we did focus on two areas, program and sustainability, because we felt like those were the ones right now that the architect and engineers need the information on as soon as possible as they do their schematic designs. So that's why we chose those two first.
I do think, though, that maybe we form the committees at
Yep.
least before we do that, because I'd like those committees to be part of those meetings.
Well, the other committee that really needs to be formed is your building committee. I mean, that's kind of the overarching,
Yeah,
the
the
big
overarching
committee
committee.
that hears all the reports from the working groups. So we need to think about that. I know that is on the agenda for your retreat, but the retreat's on January 27th. so-
27th, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we could start by like what kind of folks do we want on it, and then if we need, we can add if there are for the overall committee.
Well, and the other thing I'd like to do is just have a brief discussion about how many people there's going to be on that committee, because my gut reaction is we don't want a group of 35 people on the committee, because it'll never decide anything. I think, you know, for example, I mean, the school board's got 9 members. I think that's about the right size for the
Yeah, maybe a little
the
bigger.
committee,
Yeah.
or maybe 10 or 12. But I mean, we don't want to fill an auditorium, and on the other hand, we don't want it to be 2 or 3 people, so, I mean,
Do you have who was on the building committee, their backgrounds from the elementary schools?
Yeah. The committee was made of 9. It was the 4 capital facilities committee meetings, and then each of the principals and the principals had an alternate.
well,
So
I'd
that
like-
was it.
So it's just all school district people?
all
Yeah,
school district.
I think we ought to have
No.
some outside people. I mean, I think that's important. We may want to have, for example,
Like, what about
some
like,
representation from the city
I was gonna
government
say like Thomas
itself.
Bell or like city planner
Yeah,
type?
yeah.
Parks and Rec type?
Probably,
Right.
Aspel's got enough things to do.
Yeah, true, but I mean,
but-
somebody in his office.
His deputy.
But it could be him or his alternate,
But
right?
somebody that they want to put on
Right.
the committee.
That represents
we-
that-
We could ask the
Those
mayor
eyes. Right.
or Tom.
And has the expertise to be able to oversee
Right.
these other items.
And then probably a couple of community members. I don't know that we need to have all 4 of us on the committee necessarily, but I'm happy to serve, and maybe somebody else is. I don't know. Again, I don't know whether all these meetings would be only in the evening or whether there might be some during the day, which may make it complicated for participants. So, but you guys can talk about that more at the retreat. I'm not going to be at the retreat, but anyway.
Are there any thoughts that you have of people that you would like to see? or
like-
types of people?
Sure. Accounting type folks, engineers, retired, perhaps educators. I think you brought up, there's a lot of retirees from Concord that live in Concord that were involved in the middle school, in their time. Might be healthy to have that. Possibly a student rep or two, someone from accessibility, see if we, could get someone on the committee that has that as a focus or a background.
And I think we ought to have some people who have already stepped forward and showed a big interest in this.
Yeah.
Some of the green space folks,
Yeah, absolutely.
some of the, folks from up in the Heights area. So,
I think especially on the sub.
well, definitely on the subcommittees, we've got to really spread that out. And the overarching committee, I'd rather have people with more expertise,
Yeah.
perhaps, that are.
We should locate a landscape architect. That's a real specific, it's someone with an architectural
Yeah, that's-
background that
that's-
looks at impact on the land.
Yeah,
It's a
that's a
pretty
good idea.
specific job. I don't know if there's any in Concord, but that would be a wonderful.
Definitely
Qual
at
that
least
just-
for the site committee, if not the overall.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Richard has to be on it. There ought to be somebody from central office on it.
Definitely.
Because again, we gotta facilitate it, and we have to make sure all the meetings are posted, the routine.
Yeah.
And so we need to have those two folks on there.
So we've listed at least 25 people, but we only want to keep it to 12,
now.
so.
We'll have to see.
Talk to
But-
the superintendent.
Yeah, to be discussed further, but,
That's all I had. But there might be some other questions too, so.
Other thoughts? Things we're missing at this point? No? All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn unless anybody else has got anything.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Ms. Walsh, second.
Second.
Mr. Richards, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Enjoy the football game.
Thank you.